Very good afternoon to you all. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar, where as the FEA we've teamed up with our associate member Retrade, powered by VAT IT, to bring you the latest in trade issues that hopefully you can use to get a practical business insight into what's going on out there in the wide world at the moment and the implications. I know for many of you, you're facing the challenges that are being addressed, but this is part of the series, second in the series with Retrade and VAT IT, looking at the practical business benefits that we can bring to help you with those administrative issues that sit in the background, which become particularly challenging in a post-Brexit Britain, and also in a market where the challenges of COVID are bringing other challenges to bear upon the business. Just to give a very brief little bit of background, Retrade and VAT IT is a business that has 40 branches internationally, working across 117 countries. So they're ideally placed to give us that latest insight. And with us today is Gabrielle Magnani and Mikhail Segal, who are going to take us through a presentation. There will be an opportunity for questions, so please post those in the chat function, and we will be recording the session, so if you need to revisit it or indeed pass it on to colleagues, you'll be able to do so, and we'll make that available as soon as we're able to. But the business you're about to hear from is the largest VAT reclaim company, so they're well versed in the issues that you'll be facing. And so it leaves me just to hand over to Gabrielle and Mikhail to take us through the presentation. Thank you very much for joining us today, and over to you. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for having us. Well, thank you for having us back, as it's part two. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the challenges that we've seen over the past couple of months, and we're also going to be able to give you some actual case studies where we've actually assisted some of our clients in helping them move goods post at the 1st of January. So as Keith suggested, it's going to be myself, who's an import VAT and trade consultant and specialist. Been focusing on understanding Brexit over the past few months, and also my colleague Mikhail Segal, who is our product development manager, and she's also got a similar, if not more, understanding around the import VAT and the trade compliance and issues that we're currently seeing across the market. So today what we're going to do is just briefly recap webinar one, just going over those actionable items that I spoke about last time. We want to go into a couple of supply chain considerations, especially now that we have experience of customs in different places in different countries. We're then going to summarize it all up with a couple of keywords, ask you a quick poll, and then we're going to dig into the meat of the presentation and just go through a couple of case studies that we think are quite applicable, just to show you exactly how we assisted our clients and potentially ways that you could utilize similar techniques, similar solutions to get your goods across the border. And we'll finalize by just speaking about the single solution that we created to allow post-Brexit trade. So as we mentioned last time on the call, I just wanted to go over a couple of these actionable items. It feeds nicely into the next part where we talk about potential problems and issues that we've been facing with customs. I mentioned to you the requirement around VAT registrations and whether or not those have been, started. I hope if some of you do require these have started to take, if you've started to go ahead with those. If not, we're always willing to have a discussion just to talk through the supply chain to see whether or not a VAT registration is applicable. We'll talk about ways that you can avoid these, in the latter part within the case studies, but in every instance, this is not always required. So if you believe that you think that you might require one, we'd absolutely love to have a discussion with you to see whether that is true. Another point that we've seen so often since the 1st of January is documents. When you're clearing customs, if they have not been completed correctly, then that can actually have a subsequent impact on yourself, your clients in some cases, and ultimately it could actually result in a significant increase in costs, which you can actually get back if you are paying the import VAT. We also mentioned, finding out who's clearing customs for you. This really ties into the key focus of our presentation today about ensuring that you marry up everything. Understanding what your clearing agent, your freight forwarding company will and won't do really helps you build out your supply chain to understand how you can move goods. So if this is an area you're struggling with again, please do let us know. We can put you in touch with the right person, or we can assist you in some cases as well. I spoke around this quite a lot in the last presentation, and what I wanted the message I wanted to get across is, you know, any company can get audited on the UK side, on the foreign side, if they do have registrations. So by making sure that you are audit ready, by making sure you have evidence to hand when you're addressing them, will obviously reduce your, you know, risk of penalties and fines, and ultimately ensure that you're compliant across the EU. And finally, the key point of our presentation today, and what we've seen as, you know, significant issues across trading, is marrying logistics with compliance and customs, and making sure that you can overcome some of the obstacles that a lot of, you know, businesses are facing at the moment with clearing customs and getting goods into countries in the EU. I'm going to hand over to Michal, who's been working actively on, you know, this whole process of, you know, Incoterms, making sure goods get across the border and utilizing our knowledge in customs.
Apologies, I have muted myself. Hi everyone, thank you so much, Gabs, for the introduction. So essentially, as Gabby mentioned, I have been on the ground speaking to all the customs brokers, our clients, and you know, our teams, trying to marry the customs, the logistics, and VAT to make sure that everything is done in a way where, you know, all the goals are achieved at the end of the day. The goods clear customs in a customs compliant manner, and at the end of the day, the VAT is recoverable. You know, being a large chunk of money, if you know, your shipment happens and at the end of the day it's not recoverable, it really can, you know, cause a business to sink. So essentially, the two most common Incoterms used are the Ddp and Dap Incoterms, and essentially what the Incoterms do is they assign who is responsible for the different parts of the shipping process. So Ddp is, you know, in my view, an easier way to ship. Essentially what it means is that before the shipment has even happened, the import VAT and duties have been paid to your freight forwarder or to your clearing agent, so that once the goods arrive at customs, there is no you know, need to obtain that money at that point in time or contact anyone at that point in time. The customs broker already has that money on hand to simply continue with the process and clear customs. This compared to DAP, delivered at point, essentially this means that the customs and duties are only paid when the customs procedure is actually happening. So at the point of the customs procedure, someone needs to be called. Usually it has to be someone in an EU country. They need to be called for the funds to be paid over, and then for customs clearance to happen. So we've seen that this DAP process could look you know, favorable to a lot of sellers because they don't have to deal with the import VAT and duties on the buying end. But what we've actually seen is it's causing a large amount of delays and confusion with the swap over of from the logistics to the broker, and then to have that import VAT and duties actually paid over. So the DDP shipment, you know, it results in a much more timeliest and quicker, you know, quicker process for the shipment to happen. Because of, you know, the different responsibilities that come with the two Incoterms, DDP often implies that you as the seller are actually making a sale in that country. So you are owning the goods at import. And this means that you may have to be required to register for VAT in that country, depending on if there's a simplification measure or not. But again, it is a quicker and easier route to make sure that your buyer on the other end gets their goods in a quicker and less administrative burden time. So marrying customs, logistics, and VAT. This has been, for the last few weeks, this has been our, you know, our motto in the team is, you know, you can't do anything unless the three are married. And this is to ensure that your shipments are done efficiently, cost effective, and that your customer is happy, but at the end of the day, that there's no sunken costs or no leakage that happens, and that everything is compliant. So basically, I've spoken to numerous different freight forwarders, the bigger ones and the smaller ones, trying to explain to them why customs clearance documents need to be consigned in the way that they do, why commercial invoices need to look the way they do. But because these freight forwarders or customs brokers aren't used to dealing with customs between the UK and the EU or vice versa, they've never had to think about it before, and they found themselves in a very difficult situation because they've got this mass flow of shipments coming through where their main goal is to get the shipments through from a customs compliant perspective and to make sure they get through as quick as possible. But then you as a customer will sit expecting to see your customs clearance documents consigned in one way so that VAT reclaim is possible, and you get it back and you see that everything's actually sunk. It can also happen on both a DAP basis where your buyer is potentially responsible for doing customs clearance, but again, their broker has consigned the documents incorrectly, so the VAT is sunk again, and they might seek to you, to recover those costs. So the marriage of the three, customs, logistics, and VAT, is the main goal at the moment. It's it's absolutely vital, and it is proving to be more difficult than anyone thought at the onset. In our minds, the USA has been shipping with the individual EU countries for years now, so we thought it would just follow a smooth process. But because it is different customs brokers in some instances, and again because of the huge influx, it's just proven that it isn't actually ready, for where it needs to be. So each time a shipment is done, it does need to be looked at in isolation to make sure that while the processes are being built up with the customs brokers and freight forwarders, everything is okay for VAT reclaim purposes to ensure nothing is sunk.
And just to jump in there as well, we've increasingly seen a lot of articles. I think the most recently, HMRC has released an article to suggest that if the owner of the goods is not the one recovering the import VAT, they are going to start clamping down on it. From a legal VAT compliant understanding, what we've seen is the owner of the goods should be the only one to recover the import VAT. So there's also that consideration as well. Someone does have to pay the VAT. We understand that, the import VAT, but you have to ensure that you're aligned in terms of ownership and recovery as well. So these are a couple of words that we also mentioned in the last presentation. We're going to go now into the case studies, and we're going to hopefully address a few of these, and hopefully it'll give you more of an understanding as to why each of these are important and where they might be applicable. But before we do that, I think we're just going to launch a poll. It would be great if you guys can just answer a couple of the questions. I'm going to go on to the next part. So we're each going to just run through two case studies, so one each, just explaining the problem that one of our clients had, how we addressed it, and the different objectives that they wanted to meet post-Brexit. So in the first case study, this is specifically around an audio equipment business that is located in a couple of locations in the EU. They ship everything, they ship a lot of goods, DDP, into the EU across, a number of different countries. So they wanted us to assist them with shipping, which followed these different things. So they wanted it to be cost effective and they needed it to be compliant. They were very worried about audit. So they wanted to ensure that they were in legislation across the EU. They wanted there to be a flexible lead time. So ensuring that lead times of getting the goods from the UK to the end client was as quick as possible, and they really wanted there to be minimal admin for themselves and their buyers as well. So they wanted Retrade or VAT-IT to completely take any admin burden away from anyone in the process. They wanted it to be as easy as possible. So just to give you a bit of background, there's two different supply chains, and one part is in manufacturing in Romania, where they actually was a separate entity part of the group. they manufactured the goods in Romania, and the UK business shipped the goods themselves, ex-works, from the UK. So they took ownership of the goods in Romania, which means that Romanian VAT was actually charged on those transactions. So we not only assisted them with moving the goods, but we also assisted them with recovering the VAT on those transactions under the 13th directive, or by using indirect export and actually procuring, getting that VAT back from those suppliers. From that point, they shipped to the UK from Romania, and they understood that obviously that transaction would be subject to import VAT and duties, which unfortunately is not recoverable. The import VAT was recoverable coming into the UK. We spoke them through the C79 process to ensure that they received all of their C79s that they could then add into their local filing. It's probably also worth noting at this point as well that recovery of the C79s is sufficient evidence to go into your local filings, but obviously it's also 100% worth checking the CCDs to ensure that you are eligible to recover that import VAT. So once they got the goods into the UK, they manufactured other goods within the UK in a site in Stafford. They also did additional work to those Romanian goods, and they had clients across all of the EU member states. The Incoterms they were shipping to their clients was on a contractual basis of a DDP. So going back to what Michal said around the fact that it was their responsibility to ship the goods all the way to the end client, and make sure that they covered the costs, they were responsible for the insurance, etc. So at that point, the seller is deemed to be making a taxable supply in different EU countries and could have required foreign registrations. So I think off the top of my head, we looked at Spain, France, and Germany, Netherlands, France, and Germany, I think. And in this instance, not all of the countries actually required a registration, even though they were actually bringing the goods into all of those countries, importing them in. They still didn't need to get a registration in every single country, which meant that in these instances, they could ship directly to the end client, and they didn't need to actually procure this VAT registration. So in the Netherlands and France, there was no need to get the VAT registration. Import VAT was also payable at the border, and that we were then eligible to assist the client with recovering that via a foreign mechanism called the 13th directive. This, in essence, just allows us the ability to claim cross-border VAT, and we put together a pack of information highlighting, the need for the recovery of VAT with all the supporting evidence. We've carried out all the checks to ensure that they are within the rules and regulations of compliance in that country. But they also suggested that they wanted to increase scope and they wanted to supply to more customers across the EU. So what we decided to do was we decided to assist them in getting a registration in one country and almost using that as an EU hub, allowing them to clear customs into that country, clear the goods into that country, and then allowing the goods to be in free circulation and move in a similar way to as they did before Brexit. So they were able to be then transported onto their final destination with only clearing customs in one country. This meant that it was a lot easier in terms of carrying out the filings for one country, selling on and making all of the invoices be issued in one certain way, using one specific VAT number. And it made, it was a lot more easy for the company because they'd almost set up the exact same operations that they had in the UK in the EU, but without actually creating a full company. So without having those income tax liabilities, actually having to do transfers between the two countries for sales, it was a lot simpler and easier. My client decided to use France as a key entrance because they procured, we assisted them in procuring a deferment import VAT license, which meant that they didn't actually have to pay the import VAT at the point of crossing the border, and they deferred it to their VAT filing, which we did for them. So we carried out all the compliance checks to ensure that we accounted for every single transaction. So ultimately this kind of improved cash flow because they weren't sending this money in the outset, but they were deferring it to their VAT filing and claiming it back at the same time. So it kind of provided a net neutral in terms of the actual outset and the cash flow. As I've mentioned here, we carried out the registration, we do the filings for them, we source the appropriate license. And during the issuing period, though, there was a time where they did have to pay the import VAT, but luckily we were able to recover this on a monthly basis, which meant that their cash flow was very much improved. We actually also help them with the full logistics as well. So we actually assist them with shipping the goods from A to B, which means that we really can control the narrative when it comes to clearing customs. We can ensure that we know exactly what the document flow is and exactly how the documents are being completed, allowing our client to, kind of feel rest assured that he's going to get this import back and that he's not going to feel as much of a pinch when it comes to cash flow. The reason that he's actually decided to go with Retrade for the full logistics as well is because it really does allow us to marry up customs logistics and VAT compliance. And ultimately, he can really rest assured that there's going to be no penalties for non-compliance because he's got Retrade standing in front of him. If anything does come to light, we know that we've got the evidence to back up all the claims that we're making. I'm going to pass over to Michal now to just talk through our second case study.
Yes. So another client came to us a few months back, and they had stuck shipments in various countries. They couldn't understand why. They weren't getting answers from the logistics company. They were just being told that there are huge delays, but they weren't being told what the actual issue was. So essentially what this client wanted was frictionless movement of goods into the EU27. Like all the clients, they are shipping to quite a few places, not just one country in the EU, which of course makes in a client's mind, it makes it feel more complicated because each of these countries are independent when you're not within the EU. So the objectives for them were obviously speedy delivery to customers, which with stuck shipments, that definitely is not the case. Flexibility to continue trading across the EU27. So as they realized that each country had its own requirements, they realized that they wanted to try and target the easier countries first, but also have the flexibility that if they did get a random order from another country, they didn't have to panic or stress. They could just phone up Retrade to assist with getting that lane set up for them. And then thirdly, of course, is for the process to be cost effective, which again comes back with VAT being the large chunk of the cost, with being able to recover that VAT, as well as having competitive and cheaper logistics rates. Can you just move on? Perfect. So essentially, this company supply chain, they supply office equipment to shared work environments. So a little bit more complicated because they supply the office equipment, but at the same time, they actually install the office equipment. And for VAT purposes, you then need to assess, is it a supply of goods or is it a supply of services? They were obviously giving a combination of both. The Incoterms that they were using or were trying to use was Ddp. They didn't want, their buyers in country to have any sort of admin burden or being called by a broker saying you owe us import VAT for your goods to clear. And the crux of it, that they had sought out previous advice, but this advice suggested that they needed to register in numerous countries. So in order, essentially, whichever country they gave, they said they were shipping to, immediately this business said to them, okay, you need to register, you need to register, you need to register. So what Retrade did is that we first scoped their supply chain. So we identified where their major contracts were, so being with Ireland, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, and France. And then instead of, we took a deep dive into their supply chain, into their goods and services. We essentially did, an in-depth analysis into what the larger component was it goods, was it services, and from a VAT perspective, how the tax authorities were actually going to see it. So if an audit were ever given, they know that they were doing the correct procedures in each country. So we identified based on that where they were actually required to register for VAT and where they could simply ship without, registering for VAT without having to have that physical VAT presence in the country, but still being able to ship, not pass on any burden to their customer and reclaim the import VAT. So during this audit, we also realized that another reason that their goods were getting stuck was because they also required an export license. They shipped a specific type of goods. It's called dual use goods, where essentially you need to apply for the special permit to be able to ship the goods out, and they hadn't yet applied for this number. They didn't even know about this number, which just showed us again that when you go to a company that's solely focused on VAT or solely focused on customs or solely focused on logistics, your answers are going to be specific to the VAT, specific to the logistics, specific to the customs, and it will be up to you as the buyer, as the client, to then marry the three. And we saw that going through their all the different channels they try to go through, so having their own freight forwarder, their own company that they were looking for VAT registrations from, etc. It was just leading them down a rabbit hole that they needed to get out of. So VAT registrations were required in Ireland and Germany, with the remaining countries, so the remaining key countries, allowing for simplification measures, meaning they didn't need to register in those countries and could continue shipping. This meant that with the simplification measure countries, they didn't actually need to wait to obtain a VAT registration before they could ship. They could just simply ship direct. The next day, I think we actually loaded them. They also signed on to us with logistics. We actually loaded them the next day onto our shipping portal. We did have to wait a while to get them an EORI number. They didn't have that, but we obtained the EORI number for them. And a few days later, they had started to ship. We had their dual use license. And because we were, again, controlling the narrative of the freight forwarders and the customs broker, we were able to make sure that the goods were clearing in a VAT compliant manner as well as a customs compliant manner. And of course, realizing why their shipments were stuck, we then prevented, not just the hold up at customs, but the goods actually leaving the UK, which was, some of the shipments weren't even leaving the UK. So then the compliance that we offer these clients, because obviously they still needed to register in Ireland and Germany. So we maintain those VAT registrations for them, give them, we've given them a pack of exactly what the different invoices need to look like based on their shipping routes and shipping lanes. So because certain countries require registrations and certain countries don't, it can get very confusing. And when you bring that in with reciprocity, which is the ability for UK countries to reclaim foreign VAT without being registered in EU countries, essentially it can get very confusing about which routes to go, which invoices to go per routes. So we essentially, we build that up with the client, build up the exact shipping routes. So their internal procurement team that was actually organizing the shipments could essentially just click a button and know, okay, my shipment is going to Sweden. This is what I need to do. Then finance could see, okay, shipment was sent to Sweden. This is what the invoice needs to look like. And everything's almost housed in, in one location instead of having different, departments not speaking to each other. We like to make it like, a family where all departments can speak to us, and each department knows which part of the process they need to speak to us for. And the great thing is with this client is that they've got one point of contact with us. So if it's the lady in finance that had a query about a sales invoice, but a procurement team was adamant that whatever the shipment had to go in this way, she could easily email us, CC in the procurement team. We would all know everyone, and we could get the issue sorted out quickly. Again, with the logistics side, because we had became essentially their account holder for their shipments, we were then able to, for their previous stuck shipments, show that we were now involved in their shipments. We could speak on their behalf, see why their shipments were stuck, and get them moving again with the correct paperwork and documentation.
Just to kind of finish up, as we said, we've been through a couple of these case studies now. We've hopefully addressed a couple of questions or answers you might have. We'll go into the Q&A now, but at Retrade, we'd love to dig into anyone's supply chain to see if there's any way we can assist them, around any of the topics that we've discussed here. So there's a link at the bottom of this. I'm sure that this presentation will get sent out, but if you click this Retrade link, it will take you straight to our Calendly, where you can book a meeting with one of us, and hopefully we'll speak to a few of you soon. I'm just going to jump straight into the Q&A. I think we've only got a couple. John says we ship with a 0 VAT under regime 42 using our XI number and our fiscal rep VAT number. Is this good practice, or are we liable to VAT charges later on? So from my understanding, the regime 42 is very dependent on where the final destination of the goods is going, is very much applicable and has to be carried out correctly on the compliance documents. And I also know that you do need a VAT representative potentially to act across the EU. So without kind of having a look at the documents and saying either way, I wouldn't be able to tell you, but if it's used correctly, you shouldn't be liable to pay VAT charges later on.
Yes. And just also to make, you know, one of the mandatory pieces of that is that the goods actually are shipped into one EU country, but the final destination is another EU country. So they have to leave the EU country of import, and it has to be sent to a buyer with a VAT number in another EU country. So that end customer's VAT number is also vital in this process, and the goods leaving the EU country where they cleared customs into the EU.
And then a final one, I think maybe more for you, Michal, around dual use license. Laura says, can you explain what a dual use license means, please, when you get a chance?
Sure. So a dual use license needs to be obtained for dual use goods. And what dual use goods are goods that can be used for either military purposes, so I want to say for dangerous weaponized purposes, or can be used simply for technology purposes in the corporate world, you know, in the commercial world, absolutely nothing to do with, you know, wanting as a harming weapon for someone. So an example would be, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but a simple, like a transmitter that transmits, you know, speaking information, or someone speaking to something, you can transmit the data to someone else. Essentially that could be used, you know, and I'm sorry to sound so extreme, but it could be used in a war zone, you know, to feed information, etc. But at the same time, it could also be used to transmit information, I don't know, on a laptop, on a phone, on a computer, for you know, for everyday use. So it's all those goods, and they do fall under a specific HS code. It's all those goods that, you know, can be used for both purposes. So you need to obtain this dual use license. We are able to assist you. I'm not sure what your company ships, but if you did need one, we would be able to assist you with that dual use license. And that's then used every time your goods are exported out of the UK. That license is shown on your export documents. And it's essentially, it's a way of the government tracking, you know, the dual use goods that are leaving the country. Alongside, if goods are coming from the EU into the UK, they also, if they fall into the similar HS codes, they also may require this dual use license to be exported out of the EU into the UK. So for example, we had a client who was shipping goods from the UK to the EU. We obtained the dual use license for them, but then they realized that a while back they had dual use licenses in, they had goods that needed to come back from, I think it was France, into the UK. So they needed to obtain another dual use license so the old goods could come back. So it is a license that's taken, you know, quite strictly. If you think of the nature of the goods, it is something that the government, you know, follows tightly. And even if you get away with your goods leaving the country without having that license, if, you know, something were to, God forbid, happen, it wouldn't be great. Then, Lauria, next question. We shipped DDP, and when the invoice came through, he was charged shipping, and so was the customer. How can we keep the costs down and the customer happy? So you shipped, just to understand, you shipped DDP with a carrier, and you prepaid the freight and the duties and the import VAT, and the same freight forwarder for the same shipment also charged the buyer in country those same amounts.
I think that's it with DHL, she said.
So if we sold it versus okay, so let me finish with the DDP shipment, and then so essentially I don't see why the customer should have been charged twice, especially, I mean, we, you know, work on a daily basis with DHL, and would be happy if you wanted to send through the documentation. We, with more than pleasure, can look at it to see if perhaps there was an Incoterm or something that was added in, or maybe an error, because I think once the shipping has been paid for and the freight has been paid for, DHL shouldn't be calling or sending anything to the customer in that regard.
I think it's quite easy as well for us to obtain those documents that we require by DHL. So Laura would be more than happy to maybe have a discussion after this and take a look at those documents to see how they've been set up to hopefully reduce the cost to yourself and the client.
Yes, and then Laura, on the same note with the device, so the only way I can tell if the license is needed is to actually see that HS code. So maybe in the same follow-up call, we can discuss that and see if the license is required.
And then John has asked, do you have specialists that can deal with new EU legislation on plastics used in food service? So specifically 2020-1245. Do you mean understanding the rules and around the changes in the EU legislations, or actually how to implement them, you know, around the certificates and so on? Yes, both. Well, I think within our logistics side of the retrade business, as part of that, we identify exactly what the goods are that are being shipped. So if there is specific legislation or there's specific certificates that need to be met in order to ship goods, that will be addressed at that point. So we'd be happy to have a discussion around, you know, whatever you're specifically talking about, John, and see whether or not that's something that is automatically addressed as part of our logistics service and offering. And hopefully we can give you more insight there as well. I think what we can do, Michal, I don't know whether Laura, and I don't know whether we are able to share like our email addresses on this, so that we can so people can. I'll pop mine down in the chat now. So if anyone does want to reach out and have a discussion about anything that we've discussed today, or you know, your supply chain at all, I'm just going to put our email addresses here because I know that this is obviously going to shut down soon. So if you want to take copies of these, we'd be more. Oh, I think this is. I don't know if I sent it to everyone. We'd be happy to have a follow up following the following this discussion. Okay, perfect.
Does anyone have any further questions? You know, we're more than happy to answer
while we're here. I guess that's a wrap then.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Yeah, we look forward to hopefully speaking to a few of you one-on-one and maybe to address some of these questions. I have been informed that we're going to send a follow-up, so hopefully we'll get to speak to you both, Laura and John, and hopefully a few others if you have any questions.